So last week we started wrestling with a question that's difficult to ask, but I think is necessary for us to be asking ourselves on a very regular basis. I think it's a question that you should be asking yourself if you're dating again, or if you're still dating, what you would call being married. I think it's a question that if we asked ourselves on a regular basis, we might change the landscape when it comes to love, sex, and dating. It's this question: are you the person you're looking for is looking for? Are you the person you're looking for is looking for? I think if we started working on us more than we started looking for the right person, things might be different. Right? Because we're not going to buy into that right person myth anymore of like, I just got to find so-and-so who's going to be such and such, and that'll be the right person, and that'll make me right, and I'll be good, so I don't have to become anything. I just have to show up, and hopefully they'll bump into me, and then we'll be good. What this series is all about, my hope, is that you would get excited about marriage again, regardless of where you're at on the spectrum. My hope is that my single friends in the room would be so excited to get married one day. And you go, well, isn't every single person excited to get married? No, they're not. Do you know why? Because all they see are marriages falling apart and husbands and wives fighting nonstop. So why get married? Why put myself through that heartache? Why go through all of that trouble? The single people are not as excited to get married as you might think. But I'm hoping that by understanding the new rules to this game, that you would get really excited about that. My hope is that if you're married, you would get excited again about being married. That you would go, I am the luckiest person in the world to be in this relationship with this person. And I think we get there not so much by pointing the finger at them, but by becoming someone that God calls us to. So this series is really about preparation, helping those of you who are dating or single to prepare for getting married. We're going to talk about a lot of things today where you might try and write it off and go, well, I'm not a husband or I'm not married, so that doesn't apply to me. It does apply to you because hopefully you're going to become this person and one day be in this marriage that's different than the rest of them. So I hope it helps you prepare. This series is also for people that are married that might need to do some repair, because you have gone into your marriage and you've been in this marriage long enough and created enough habits and kind of just ruts that you're in that it's time to repair some things. Because what nobody told you was that one day your present would be your past, but your past would be present in your future. And so all of the stuff that made you you and that you didn't work on when you were dating made its way into your marriage, and now you're going, this marriage isn't what I thought it would be. They're not the person that I thought they would be. I don't want to be in this thing anymore. My hope is that by the time we're done, you go, man, I'm so glad I'm in this marriage. And I know what I need to do in order to make this marriage great. And one of the baseline things that we need to do, we talked about last week, is simply grow up. When it comes to those words, love, sex, and dating, we need to mature and start thinking of them differently. Start thinking of them and understanding them in the way that they were actually designed. So last week we looked at a verse right at the end that's at the end of the love chapter. You remember the love chapter? You've heard the love chapter. It's at every wedding you go to, but no one ever talks about verse 11. We go through love is patient, love is kind, love, all of that, and nobody goes all the way to verse 11, which reads like this: when I was a child, I talked like a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me. What Paul gets at is a mature understanding of love as defined by God, the creator of it, means you're going to have to grow up. You can't think about it like a little kid anymore. And so this morning, men, we're going to grow up. The next several minutes are really going to be geared for the guys in the room. So ladies, you can sit back and relax. Please don't give any nasty looks to your husband or boyfriend that's sitting next to you, though. We'll come back to the women a little bit later, but guys, there are a lot of little boys running around our world dressed up as 45-year-old men. And they think they understand what we're talking about when we talk about love, sex, and dating. But when you put their understanding of it up against the 1 Corinthians 13 understanding of it, they are way off. And so we're going to spend the next little bit together making all of the guys in this room squirm. And it'll be okay. We'll come full circle. But I really am going to be talking to the guys for a little bit. Because these boys that are running around dressed up like men have somehow allowed themselves to begin thinking of women as commodities. They have become something that we can conquer and collect and marvel at our conquests. They've become a thing that we possess and we use until we don't want it anymore, and then we get rid of it. It reminds me of the basketball cards I used to collect when I was a kid. Did you ever collect sports cards? And I used to spend a lot of money on these stupid things. You know what they're worth today? Next to nothing. They make really good fire starters. But back in the day, these little pieces of cardboard were very precious to me. And I had a really big collection of them. And then certain ones would kind of stand out, and they'd get put in the plastic sleeve that would go in the binder, and I'd really protect it and try and keep my siblings away from it. And then every once in a while, I'd go to have a sleepover at my friend's house, and we'd bring all of our cards. You know what we'd do? We'd trade them. We'd do things like, well, I'll give you this one card if you give me those two cards. And then we'd come back, no, that's worth 3 cards. I'll trade you, and we barter like this. And then we acquire this new card, and we think, boy, we have got it now, and we get very proud of ourselves, and so on and so forth. But later on, as I grew up, they became just these things collecting dust in the closet. But these cards were a commodity. The trouble is with commodities, they're not something that we value, they're something of value, which means they're easy for us to take and give, right? And we don't have a whole lot of concern for them. Other than my one friend, I remember he'd always get kind of sad when he'd trade a card. And I think he was just a deeper person than me. He felt bad that he was giving up on that player. So it went a little deeper for him. But for most of us, these are just pictures on a piece of cardboard. They're not attached to the person at all. This is not the person. This is a picture of the person. And it's a commodity to me. And what we've allowed ourselves to do in society, guys, is turn women into sports cards. Things that we collect, things that we allow to make ourselves feel better about ourselves, and then we discard them when they're no longer of use to us. And you go, we live in America, we don't do stuff like that. Have you turned on your television? Have you gone to a movie lately? Have you listened to the music that our children are pumping through their earbuds every day? We're no different. We've just gotten good at keeping it secret. But we have allowed women to become a commodity. We've allowed a person to become a thing, and we can treat a thing however we want. But this morning I want to challenge you with the fact that when I read the Bible cover to cover, there is no allowance for that kind of behavior. And when you look at a biblical definition of love and how men are supposed to view women, it says this: love refuses to view a someone as a something. Love refuses to view a someone as a something. If you are going to love someone, then it should be impossible for you to understand them as anything other than a created, made in the image of God person. That's what love is. Now, some people are going to hear this message, or they're going to watch it online, and they're going, well, here we go, another old-fashioned, closed-minded church preacher man. This is just so old-fashioned, this kind of thinking. Well, yeah, it is. I'll admit that. But so is the problem. The problem's been around since the very first century with the Romans. And the reason this is important is because for the passages that we're about to look at this morning, they are speaking into a context that's scary, but real, and not unlike the context in which you and I live today. You see, in the Roman world in the first century, prostitution was not only legal, it was promoted. It was looked at as a good thing. So it was a good career for women. And men should never feel guilty. Prostitution was a totally acceptable, cheered on kind of thing. But it's easy in that context to dehumanize the person. And they become a commodity. They become a trading card. Also in the first century, slavery was totally acceptable. And you and I both know that slavery is a thing where a person is totally robbed of their humanity. And they become a thing that you can do whatever you want with, whenever you want to, and no one will bat an eye. And when they're no good to you anymore, you just get rid of them. This is the context in which the New Testament speaks. And then you add to it that because of all of this kind of thinking, children became a nuisance in the Roman world. They didn't want little boys and girls, especially little girls. In fact, most of the time, if a little girl was born to a Roman, they would throw them out to the street. Or worse, throw them in the river. Because life was not precious then. People were not humans. They were just things. And if you didn't want that thing, you get rid of that thing. It became so bad that the Roman Empire had to instill a law that you had to get married because the guys started thinking, well, I don't want to have kids because then I'm going to have to split up my empire. And I don't want to do that. I don't want to leave that to them. This is mine. And if I'm not going to have kids, why do I want to get married? I just want to have sex. And prostitution's cool here, so I'm not going to get married. Why do I even got to worry about that? This is the context in which the Bible speaks into. This is the context that made it so radical when Jesus started teaching the things that he taught. Let's take a look together. John chapter 13. If you've got a Bible with you, you want to open up to John chapter 13, or if you pull it up on your phone, that's cool. But Jesus is teaching, and I want you to understand that when he begins teaching what we're about to read, there are all kinds of people in the room. All kinds of them. Rich, poor, influential, insignificant. Men, women, children, all ethnicities, all of them were just gathered around to hear Jesus teach because he'd come to be known as this great teacher that said things that people didn't expect, and so he was a bit of a spectacle. So people gather around, and they're in the middle of this kind of Roman context, and in chapter 13, right at verse 34, Jesus says this, "A new command I give you, love one another." So this crowd hears Jesus say, "I give you a new command, love one another." And I just imagine that doofus in the back row, looking around. "Do you mean the women too?" And Jesus, "Yes, I mean the women too. Love them." Remember, he's talking to a bunch of people who don't view other people as anything more than something for their benefit or loss. So the idea that Jesus says, it doesn't matter who they are, it doesn't matter what gender they are, it doesn't matter what ethnicity they are, you are to love them, that was completely upside down from how they usually thought. Jesus was talking countercultural to the nth degree. And then he goes on, he says, "A new command I give you, love one another as I have loved you. So you must love one another." Now, the listeners in that moment did not have the vantage point that you and I do. But you and I understand that in order to love people, love women, and view them in the way that Jesus did, that's going to come at some kind of sacrifice to us. That's going to come at a significant cost to us, because that's the cost that Jesus paid to love us. This is huge what Jesus is saying. And if they had had the vantage point, I imagine that same guy in the back, you mean for the women too? And Jesus goes, will you just be quiet? Yes. Everyone. Love one another. Look in this room. If they're in this room, if they're on this planet, you are to love them. Now, of course, we're not necessarily talking about romantic love. We're talking about the kind of love that Jesus displayed, sacrificial, servant in nature. And we're not just talking about everyone that's connected to you. And how this plays out in the context in which we're applying it today is, I'm not just talking about the women that you are married to or that is your mother or your sister. I mean every woman, every person for that matter, that you come eyeball to eyeball with, you are to love them. And guys, even the women you come eyeball to eyeball with through a computer screen. And we'll come back to that. Every woman, love. It's what makes Christians different, Jesus says. Look at what he says in verse 35. By you loving one another, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. In other words, this is how the world is going to know that you're a Christian. By the way you treat people, by the way you interact with people, by the way you view them. That's how people are going to go, they're different. They must be a Christian. And in the first century, one of the ways that they were set apart was they valued women. So women flocked to the church because it was the one place in their life where their status was elevated and they were looked at as a precious child of God. Radical difference from the world. But it's not always what we think. Jesus says, love one another. He says, refuse to look at a someone as a something. That's not Christianity when you let that happen. Christianity is that you always view the person that you are looking in the eyes as an image of God creation that he values. So, real quick side road for the women in this room. I want you to know something. Regardless of what that immature little boy tells you in your life, you are loved by your Maker. Regardless of how your dad let you down and maybe didn't instill in you the value he should have, your Father in heaven loves you. And he made you. And he thinks you're great. And so he commanded his church to understand that and live that out. And then Paul, after Jesus has ascended up to heaven, and Paul takes it a step further and makes it hyper practical, this teaching of Jesus. In Ephesians 5, verse 25, he says, husbands, in the same way, or husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. It's this interesting metaphor that Jesus uses and the Bible uses all the time, where Jesus represents the groom and the church represents the bride. And Paul says, listen, husbands, men, you are to love your wife, the woman in your life, like Jesus loved the church, even to the point of giving yourself up for her. Now, God forbid any of us are ever in a position where we might have to give up our physical heart-beating lives. But you may have to die to yourself, I think is what Paul's getting at. See, I love when I'm doing premarital counseling. One of the things I'll usually do is I'll take the guy out, just me and him. And I'll open up to Ephesians 5:25, where I have this verse highlighted. I'll turn my Bible around, shove it across the table, and say, can you read that to me out loud? And I have the guy read it to me out loud, and I go, are you ready? Does that describe you? Are you willing? If not, don't marry her. I spend a lot of time trying to scare people out of getting married because I think it's way more, there's way more gravity in it than we ever give it credit for. It's way more important to God than we ever think sometimes. He says, husbands, you're to love your wives as Christ loved the church. Now listen, single guys in this room, I know what you're thinking. Cool, I'm off the hook because I'm not a husband yet. And you are preparing to be one, so you need to begin thinking this way and living this way when you're out on a date with your girlfriend. When you're thinking about your relationship, you need to be thinking this way. Do I love this person? Because there are too many guys that think they're in love because they're having sex. But you are not in love unless you can say, I will give my life, physically, emotionally, spiritually, for this person. That is a biblical view of a woman from a man's seat. It's intense, right? That woman is not a commodity to the man who loves her that way. So Paul makes it really practical. Peter makes it impossible. Turn to 1 Peter chapter 3. Now understand who Peter is. Peter is one of the disciples. Peter is one of the guys who spent 3.5 years walking around with Jesus. And so Peter was around when Jesus stopped at the well and talked to, ready for this, the Samaritan woman. First of all, Jews don't talk to Samaritans. Second of all, men don't talk to women. And here's Jesus sitting down at the well, carrying on a conversation with her, and then he drinks water from her cup, which this sounds very juvenile, but this is what it was. That had cooties, and he never should have done that. Or remember the time when the woman was caught in adultery and they were going to throw rocks at her and kill her, and Jesus steps in and for all intents and purposes saves her life? That was a woman. So they not only had a problem with Jesus talking about, hey, those without sin be the first to cast the stone, they had a problem with, dude, what are you doing trying to protect a woman? Remember the context in which the Bible is speaking. Jesus was countercultural. So Peter watches this happen. And then he sits down to pen his part of the Bible. And in chapter 3, verse 7, he writes, husbands, in the same way, be considerate as you live with your wives and treat them with respect. Stop. Husbands, be considerate of your wives and treat them with respect. Now, I'll remind my single friends in this room, this is your practice thing. You may not be a husband yet, but you need to understand what Peter is talking about. He says, you need to treat them with respect. What's interesting is the Greek for that phrase only appears in this sentence in the New Testament. You don't see it anywhere else. Now, anytime something like that happens, it's important. You need to circle it and underline it and highlight it. And it means that the author has something really pointed to say. He says, you need to treat your wives with respect. Men, you need to treat women with respect. What he's saying is you need to ascribe to them honor. You need to honor them in the way that you treat them and talk to them and view them. You need to give them the Jimmy Fallon treatment. Treat them like they are the most important, most famous, most best person in the world to you. That's what Peter says husbands are supposed to do. That's what Peter says men who are training to be husbands need to do with the women in their lives. Not just the women they're connected to, but all of the women. You need to treat them with respect and honor them. Be the dude that holds the door open. Be the guy that opens the car door. Be the guy that pays the bill. Honor them. But Peter doesn't stop there. And the next phrase, if someone is holding your hand, you need to get ready because they're going to squeeze really tight in a second. He says, treat them with respect as the weaker partner. Again, you might have nails digging into your hand. Let me tell you what I don't think Peter is saying. I don't think Peter is saying that the female is less important. I don't think that he's saying she's less intelligent. I don't think that he's saying she matters less or that she's less valued. We're going to show you in a minute he's saying actually the exact opposite. But what he's saying here is chances are the guy that you're sitting next to would maybe beat you in an arm wrestling contest. But deeper than that, I think it's a reference to kindness. Do you remember how we defined kindness last week? When you leverage your strengths for the benefit of someone else, not expecting anything in return. And I think the call here from Peter is, you, man, leverage your strength on their behalf whenever you can, however you can, as often as you can. Because that's what it means to be a man. That's what it means to love someone. You see, we got to get away from this might is right kind of thinking. Real men think, it's all about muscle and how hard you can punch something, and real men love women the way that God told them to love women. Real men are defined by 1 Corinthians 13. So Peter, like I said, is telling us the opposite of what you might actually think when you hear that. He goes on and he says, and as heirs with you, do you hear that? As heirs with you of the gracious gift of life. Understand that in the eyes of God, you are all heirs to the throne. It's crazy to think. I come back and say to the women in this room, you need to understand that according to the Bible, you are a princess. Literally. A daughter of the king. You are a princess. You are valued. You are a treasure. There is someone looking after you, caring for you, protecting you, regardless of what the idiots in this world might tell you or show you. Your Father in heaven, the King of all things, calls you his daughter. And so often, the picture that runs through my head when I read passages like this is you're sitting on one side of the table and God the Father is sitting on the other side. So you want to take out my daughter. And I don't think God had a shotgun, but maybe he had a lightning bolt. If you're going to take out my daughter, if you're going to marry my princess, then you better understand who she is. And you better take care of her. And you better honor her and respect her. Because she matters to me. She matters to me so much that this is what Peter says at the end, and this is mind-boggling. He says all of this, and then at the end he says, so that nothing will hinder your prayers. There is no way for me to theologically dance around this sentence other than your connection with God is affected by the way you treat the woman in your life. I don't know how else to look at that other than God is saying your prayers are going to have a hard time if you can't respect women. If you can't love the way I've told you to love, if you can't practice it even before you're married, it's going to be a hindrance on our relationship. Because according to God, love refuses to look at a someone as a something. It's not in his character. God is love, so when he looks at you, he refuses to look at you as a something, only a someone. It hurts a little bit. Chances are you are not going to go home and open up 1 Peter 3:7 and write it on the wall because that hurts, guys. But that's how much this idea matters to God. It's not just old-fashioned. It's his heart. And so you and I need to change. We need to change, fellas. And not just the things that we do. I don't want to inadvertently slip this morning into behavior modification. Because that's often what we think, especially in a discussion like this. We think it's all about create a list of things that I need to do and create a list of the things that I don't need to do, make sure I do the do's and don't do the don'ts, and then I'll be good. That's behavior modification. We want to get deeper than that. Because everything you've ever done, good, bad, or in between, started in your mind. Have you ever thought about that? It started in your mind. You had a thought that you didn't take captive, and you allowed it to keep festering, and eventually it turned into action. That's why Paul wrote in Romans 12:2, "Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." You see, your brain is this incredible thing. God is the greatest inventor ever. Your brain has these synapses that fire. And if they fire in the same direction for a long enough time, they begin to create what are called neural pathways. They're like roads in your brain. They're like that beaten trail out in the woods that you don't know how it got there, but enough people walked there enough times that now there's a trail, and that happens in your mind. And habits are formed because your thinking just runs on these tracks you've created in your brain. And so you'll often hear men, especially, say things like, "I can't control myself." No, you've created patterns in your mind that you need to destroy. You need to literally, and you can do this, science has shown us, you can change the shape of your brain. And I think I know it's why God gets to this in Romans. You need to be transformed by the renewing of your mind. You need to have a hold of the things that you're pouring into that thing, because they're going to create these pathways that you're going to live on and eventually feel like you don't have control of, but you put them there. You allowed them there. So fellas, let's talk for a minute about the music you listen to. Because everywhere you go, if you ride the train in the city, or you're in a car, or you have your alarm clock go off, or whatever the case may be, we always have music on. We're a weird society. We are terrified of silence. And we will have music on for everything. While we cook, while we shower, you fill in the blank, we've got music going. And what we don't always think about is that music is informing the way that we're thinking about certain things. And if you're like some of my high school friends in the room that I've talked to about this, they go, "Well, good news, man, I don't listen to the lyrics, I just like the beat." If you ever hear that from one of them, or high schoolers, I'm warning you, don't pull this with an adult. Google a popular song and start reading some of the lyrics, and I'll promise you they can finish them. What that shows you is that sometimes this is way more subtle than we think. The way that it's informing our brain and shaping our brain. And some of you are daily listening to music that has given a title to women that is horrible. And we've taken words that are nasty and hurtful and dehumanizing, and we've given them to women. And the lyric will say it over and over and over again. And what that allows us to do when we give a woman that title is we treat them like a commodity. Because we don't think of them as a woman anymore. It happens in every place you find genocide. In Rwanda, the Hutus start calling the Tutsis cockroaches. And it's easy to stomp a cockroach. So when you're killing that person, you don't worry about that person, you're just taking care of a nuisance now. It's what the Nazis did with the Jews. You know what they called Jewish women? Whores. It's easy to kill a whore. When we give titles to people, it allows us to dehumanize them and treat them completely different than they're supposed to be treated. And so men, if you have songs on your phone or on your iPod or wherever it is that you have music that is ascribing one of these titles to women, you need to erase it today. Get in your car and delete it. And when it asks you, do you want to delete it from your phone or from your library? Library. Get rid of it. Take the CD, crack it in half, throw it in the garbage. You go, man, I'm not going to have anything to listen to anymore. There's free music on the radio. But that music is pounding pathways into your brain that are allowing you to view women in a way counter to what the Bible says you should be viewing them as. Get rid of it. Because you are either going to refuse to allow someone to be of something, or you're not. And you won't condone it in other people. Let's talk about what we'll just call erotic imagery for a little bit. Because now it's in still pictures, and it's in movies, and it's in GIFs, and it's one Google away. And by the way, before we get too far and we start to think that pornography is only something that men struggle with, statistics now show that it's even. There are just as many women that struggle with an addiction to pornography as there are men. But you need to know, every time you pull that up on your screen, whether it's on your phone or your television or computer, every time you pull that up, you're going to school. And that school teaches 3 lessons every time you check in. Lesson number 1, a real body is not enough. That's what they're teaching you. A real body is not enough. The way God made someone is not enough. Lesson number 2 is one body isn't enough. It's what a lot of the guys that are dating are struggling with. It's one of the reasons they're afraid of marriage. One woman for the rest of my life? Having sex with the same person for the rest of my life? That feels weird to them because they've allowed their brain to be shaped by this media that tells them one body is not enough. The third lesson is that your wife's body is not enough. Because she doesn't look like them. And she won't do what they do. And she won't say what they say. And again, your classroom is teaching you the things that become natural later. And you view women differently than you're supposed to. It actually messes with the chemicals in your brain. Did you know that studies are starting to show that pornography is just as addictive as any hard drug? That the chemicals that get released in your brain from viewing porn are just as addictive. In fact, in a lot of circles, they're calling it the new drug. And some Christians have called it the biggest threat to Christianity, because there are so many Christians that struggle with that addiction. And you know what's interesting? In case you're saying, oh man, here we go, old-fashioned again. These are secular studies that are finding these. This isn't just coming out of churches. And what I mean by secular is just, these are studies done by people that don't go to church and don't really care about God or any of that stuff. They're scientists, right? And so they do these studies on people, sociologists and all this, and they have concluded that pornography is addictive and it's bad for you. It's not the church saying that. This is people, this is society now is finding this. It's not unlike back in World War II, they used to give the GIs as many cigarettes as they wanted because we didn't know anything about cigarettes, and it just seemed like it helped everybody relax and get through life. But later on, that stopped because they discovered it was harming you, and science is showing us that pornography is harming you. It is bad for your health. It's bad for your brain. Remember the old commercial with the egg? This is your brain on drugs. But isn't it interesting? They didn't talk about a single drug. They talked about the effects it has on your brain. See, the Bible knows what it's talking about. So God calls us to refuse to view a someone as a something. And every time we check into the school of pornography, it's teaching us thing. And so we can get serious about this, or we can say, yeah, nice message. Christians shouldn't care about that. We should be different. Cool. And then go back to our old habits. Or we can begin to radically change the shape of our mind. And so here's some ideas for you guys, or women if you're struggling with it. Take the computer out of your office. Take it out of your bedroom. Take it out of anywhere where you can close a door. Put it in the most central location of your house. For most of you, that's going to be your kitchen. I know that seems weird, but put your computer in your kitchen where there's going to be all kinds of traffic. So you can't go hide. Because you are going to refuse to view a someone as a something. You might do this. If your wife goes to bed before you, she gets to take the computer and your phone with her. Right? Because you're either going to be serious about this or not. If the deal is your wife goes to bed before you most nights, then I think what you should do is fold the laptop down, give her your phone, put it on vibrate so it doesn't wake her up, and let her take it to the bedroom with her. And you know what's going to happen? You're going to go to bed earlier and start sleeping more. Because what else are you going to do now? But you're raising the level of accountability. If you live in an apartment building, here's a radical idea. Knock on your neighbor's door and say, I want to give you free internet. Here's how it's going to work. I want to hook my router up in your house. You can disconnect yours. I'll hook my router up in your house, but here's the deal. At 8:30 p.m., I want you to unplug it. And you aren't allowed to plug it back in because I don't want to be able to get on the internet. What if you did that? That's refusing to view someone as a something. For those of you that are dating, you may need to take a radical step, and I mean radical step, and swear off dating for an entire year. I'll let that sink in a minute. Swear off dating for a year. I mean, pull your phone out this afternoon, find April 10th, 2017, and put on that date, resume dating. And don't date for a year. Give yourself the space to renew your mind. Give yourself the space to grow up and mature. High school students in the room, you have plenty of time to find that one. Because you're not even going to be concerned with finding that one. You're just going to become the one. But give yourself space to actually change the way you think. Because we're all excited to date, and we're all excited to have sex, and we're all excited to get ourselves out there, but we have not done the preparation to handle it properly. So do the work. Be committed. Be one of those guys in the world who refuses to view the women in your life as a thing. And view them as the cherished, made in the image of God, loved one that they are. I'll tell you, two things are going to happen. Someone's going to come up to you and go, you must be a Christian because you treat women differently. Because they will know that you're his by the way you love one another. And the other thing, guys, you start living this way, thinking this way, you will be a hot commodity. Because there are a lot of women looking for a guy who will love them in the way that God designed love. So get to work. Let's pray. God, it's so hard, really, because we are inundated with the wrong message every time we turn on our phone or our television or go to the movies or turn on a song. Lord, the reality of our world is it is progressively dehumanizing people. And it's not looking at them the way you look at them. It's looking at them as a commodity that can be traded or bought or discarded. There's no getting around what you've said in Scripture this morning, though. And for some of us in this room, we've been squirming. And somebody will write me a letter or an email this week that's going to say, I felt like you were talking to me, or you read my mail, or whatever. Lord, this is what I hope you'd impress on them, that is you. That's you getting their attention and calling them to something greater. Lord, you are the one who gives freedom. And so my prayer for my friends starting this minute, is that you would give them freedom from pornography, that you would give them freedom from the wrong view of people, that you would instill in us your heart and your mind so that the world will know who we belong to. Help us to be different. Help the men to be men. Thanks, Lord, for giving us clear direction. In Jesus' name, amen.